Good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Eastman. I'm here with Randy Scott, and I just want to introduce what we're doing tonight. It's going to be different than what we've done. Previously we've had a lot of lessons on the prophets and minor prophets, and those have been great. But tonight we're going to have a long overdue conversation about race and racism in America and how it's affecting us personally as Christians. And we could do this a more traditional way. We could have a lesson, and I'm sure that in the coming weeks and months and years, this will be an ongoing topic that we talk about a lot more, and God's taking us deeper. But we thought that we want to do something different tonight. Instead of a lesson, we thought maybe doing an interview would be powerful. Now, just to start, Randy and I want to make it clear that we understand that not everyone in our congregation or in America is white or black. And even these categories fail to express the rich diversity represented by those words. And we're not trying to ignore those who don't fall into these categories. There are people of all races in our church. Yeah. But right now, the ongoing tension is a black and white tension. And other people are involved, or all feeling things. But because we can't hit everything in one sitting, we're just going to talk about that today. And those other conversations will come. This is a time not just of question answering, but more importantly, storytelling. And we understand, too, that look, Randy and I are just one white man and one black man. Mm-hmm. And so our experiences won't be everybody's experiences. Our feelings won't be everybody's feelings. Much of this is just a conversation to bring light to an area that has needed light shedded on it for a really long time. And one of the most important things I've learned in the last couple of weeks, which I will speak to, is the importance of me hearing stories. Mm-hmm. And this is really more than anything a story time for Randy and I. Just to talk and for us to hear his experiences and how those things are even impacting me. And we hope that by listening to those stories, it'll encourage us as a church and just as a people to become a place where this kind of interaction is normal and frequent, and as opposed to extremely rare, which is how it's been for me personally. And so I hope that in time, this conversation with Randy will spark many more. That's the hope. And we also understand that Randy is not the only black man in the church, and so I know that he's been on camera a lot, and I know he feels that. There will be many more people that have the opportunity to speak to these things in a variety of ways, but this is just where we're starting. I want to introduce Randy. Randy, great to have you with us, man.
Good to be here.
Randy and I get to be together a lot. I've so loved our interactions together. I get to start going to our elders meetings that we do every Tuesday. We meet together with the evangelists and the elders, and I know that's been really special for me to be around you, and I think just such an amazing guy. And I wanted to introduce you a little bit. You were an all-star athlete in high school and the class president. Inducted, I didn't know this, but you were inducted into the High School Hall of Fame. Just so you guys know, I secretly got this information from Randy's wife because I knew he wouldn't give it to me because he's too humble. But you were also inducted into the Clemson Football Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. You received your bachelor's in education from there. What position did you play in Clemson?
Middle linebacker.
And I remember you told me a really, it's a story for another time, but Randy told me a really great story about how he was in a game with Joe Montana. And so maybe eventually you'll have a chance to tell that story. But I'm a 49ers fan, so when he played for Notre Dame, that was before my time. But you played pro football for a year in Canada before coming to Gainesville. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to let you speak to your family, so I won't talk about that yet. But you were Florida's Teacher of the Year in 2003.
Yes.
How did that come about? Was that something you expected to happen?
No, it was totally by accident. They nominated me at PK Young, and PK Young is the only school district. Right. So it wasn't a big competition, whereas most districts have 10 to 20 schools. We had one. So they voted for me, and I was like, this is not a big deal. But as we moved through the process, it became a bigger and bigger deal until we got to the final five, which surprised me. All of the teachers in the final five had a whole lot more experience in years. And when they called my name, I was just stunned. So,
wow.
But that was a good year.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's in 2003. You received your master's and your doctorate from UF in educational leadership.
Yes.
Which is amazing. You also told me that you spent more money at UF than anyone else.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm sure they're grateful for your money. And you're currently serving as principal at SciTech Charter School. Can you tell us a little bit about SciTech?
SciTech Charter High School is a charter high school for students grades 9 through 12. Our ages are a little different. We take students between the ages of 15 to 24. Most of our kids have had trouble in school. Some do not like an in-school experience for 7 hours a day. So we have a 5-hour day. Kids can work at home, which has really been good. Our kids have done well. Yeah. They were prepared to work at home already for the pandemic because all of our curriculum is online. And we allow kids to accelerate. Some kids do great retrieval. But for the most part, it's a great experience for kids who traditional school don't work for. So we have the same amount of credits that regular high school does. Yeah. And generally most kids get done by the time they're 19.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I love it. And you became a disciple of Jesus in 1984?
1984, November the 15th.
It's a good day.
Good day.
And you've served as an elder at our church since 2009.
Yes.
And I just so I say it, and I know everybody listening that knows you feels this way, I just think you're just an amazing man of God. Patient, kind, loving. I wrote down some of the things that I thought of when I thought of you. Authentic, deeply spiritual, humble. You're very thoughtful. I think about times when maybe other people haven't noticed what I've gone through, and you've said those things. Even last night we had a phone call that you said some things that really helped me that I wasn't expecting you to say. And I just feel like in a lot of ways I look to you as a man who you're the result of a lifetime of letting God refine you. And I think about that scripture in Jeremiah that says how God wants to shape his people, he's, the potter and we're the clay, and I really feel like you've allowed that. So I'm just grateful you're here, and I'm grateful to have this conversation together.
Me too.
So just want to start off real quick, just one lighthearted question just to get it going. But did you have a favorite moment or time when you played football at Clemson as middle linebacker?
Well, I was thinking about a favorite time in college football, and I actually thought it was actually earlier than college football. One of the things that you have to be aware of is that at the time, the SEC and the ACC were just starting to integrate. Right. And I'm from Waycross, Georgia. And when you're from Georgia, everybody goes to Georgia. Right. All of my friends went to Georgia. My head coach went to Georgia. I knew Vince Dooley since I was 13, and I was primed to go to Georgia from grade 9 through grade 12. Wow. So when I went on my recruiting trip, you got to imagine this. I'm 17 years old. Right. I'm at the University of Georgia. I'm from a town that's got about 20,000 people, and I'm in a crowd of 80,000 Georgia football fans. And so we have dinner the night before at Vince Dooley's house, which was special. And so a lot of the recruits that were there, I didn't see, but they allowed me to ride on the team bus to the stadium, which was like, they're selling it. They're ready. So I'm riding on the bus by the quarterback, starting quarterback, Matt Robinson. Okay. I remember his name to this day. And I'm taking it in. You're 17. I'm like a Georgia player, and I'm waving at people as if I'm getting off. We get off the bus. Right. We walk through the fans, and I still remember that. So most of the recruits sat in the stadium, but I got to go on the sideline. So I'm on the field, and so they get ready to do the coin toss. Matt Robinson is one of the team captains. And he allows me to walk out the midfield.
They're selling it so hard.
For the coin toss.
They wanted you to play for them.
And they do the toss, they flip it, and Matt grabs the coin. 1974, I know because I still have the coin, and he hands it to me.
Oh, no way.
And so I know I was probably thinking of a sport moment, but I still remember that moment. I still have that coin in my collection. So that was my highlight moment for me.
Well, that's never happened to me. I think at this point it probably won't. That's okay. And then lastly, just before we really jump in here, I'd love if you told us a little bit about your family, your wife and your kids, just so we get a feel for it.
Oh, we got a great family. Teresa and I met at Clemson our senior year. We moved in 1980 to Gainesville, Florida, not knowing that the reason we were moving here was to find God, which is the reason I probably met her. Probably wouldn't have found God without her. And we've been here ever since. We had 2 boys, Ian and Alik, and we always wanted a girl. Yeah. But we didn't want to try to have 3 boys because it was tough with 2. Right. And so on Mother's Day of 1983, we were able to adopt here at the church, Christian Family Services, our daughter Angela.
Yeah.
And then soon after that, about a year later, we adopted two more biracial boys, two brothers. So we went from 2 to 3 to 5. Woo! And now they're all adults, and now we're grandparents with 15. Let me say that again: 15 grandkids, wow. And we love it. But a lot of things God had done to keep us here in Gainesville and to be a part of this great church.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, let's jump in. The reason people are here, right?
Okay.
So you played at Clemson, and it's predominantly white university in the 70s, and it was right when you said the SEC and the ACC were integrating the races. What was the mood of the country and of our churches at that time, with race relations? Yeah.
Well, first, let me start with the church. I grew up in a Church of Christ in Waycross, Georgia, and always was conflicted with us being the kingdom of God, because there were two white churches and there was one black church. Of course, the black church I grew up in, so I wasn't too prone to being in a church that was integrated or diverse. The school system was forced to integrate around about the same time, about 1971, 72. A lot of racial infighting. It was not a good time. There was a lot of protesting. I still remember as a young boy standing behind my sister as we were pelted and hosed by police. And I don't know if I was focusing on all of the things that were happening. I was just trying to keep my older sister safe, because she was a little more active than me, right, and was leading out in front. And so that was the mood when they integrated, and pretty much like all of integration at that time, they took the black high school and made it the middle school. And they actually did that here in Gainesville with Lincoln High School. And so there was a lot of, tension, there was a lot of hate, a lot of strife, and so it wasn't a good time in our history. A lot of emotions, a lot of anger, and it was not good. And we didn't process that era the right way, and that's why we're still in a lot of it today. Yeah. And so all of the players older than me had gone to a historically black university or college. I was one of the first kids that was, in a line to go to a white university. So it was scary, yeah, but it was also people pushing, the limit to try to force the integration. At the age of 9, I was at a black elementary school, grades 1 through 3, and in the 4th grade, because I was a big 4th grader and they felt I could take care of myself and I had good grades, I went to the white elementary school.
Wow. So
in a white elementary school of about 700, I was the first black kid, and this was probably 1967. Wow. And it was right before, Martin Luther King was assassinated and all those things.
You were 9.
I was 9.
And were you the only black?
I was the only black student at the elementary school.
How many? Do you have any idea?
Probably about 600. That's just kind of an estimate.
They just sent you.
Yeah, and I just sent me. And I still remember the first day. It was hilarious because, coming up to that date, I was like excited. I was like, I'm going to a new school, blah, blah, blah. But when I walked up, I could still see a sea of students, all white kids. And it looks like a sea of people parted. And I was like, why are all these people standing out?
Yeah.
And so as I walked through this crowd, they're just literally looking at me. I still remember my 4th grade teacher, Miss Langford. She walks out, she reaches her hand out, and she said, "Good morning, Randy, welcome." And this is a 9-year-old. I felt so special because I was like, how does she know my name? This is the first, but they were prepared for it. And it's interesting, at that school, I did not face a lot of negativity, a lot of, fighting or anything like that. I had one incident when we were playing football at recess, and one of the kids called me the N-word. and it, it shocked the
Yeah.
whole group because I was a big fourth grader.
Right.
And forgive me now, but he was immediately whooped.
Yeah. Well, fourth grade, we won't hold it against you.
Nobody else jumped in
No, I'm sure they
because
did.
a lot of the kids felt that it was warranted.
Yeah.
I was taken to the principal's office, and rather than suspend it, the principal called my mom and told my mom what had happened. And so my punishment for the rest of that week was detention, but it was kind of a guided detention where I would have lunch in the principal's office every day with the principal.
Okay.
So my detention was there, and that was the only bad incident. Unfortunately, at that same time, I was trying out for the elementary school football team. School was called Williams Heights. So, a lot of the kids that were in fourth grade were excited because they knew of me from the black elementary school as being the best football player there. They had the best white football player. His name was Jack Chaney. And so the idea of Jack and me in the same backfield, it was about to go down. And so I go out for football practice. And first day, I go through the drills. There's no pads. And I can see the whispers, and the coaches are not, because there had not been a black kid on any of these teams. And so the first day, went through practice, and the coach said, well, in order to be, you're going to have to get your own helmet and shoulder pads, which I'd never heard of that.
Right.
And so I was a single mom, 8 kids. My mom, worked for white people. She couldn't afford it.
Right.
I went home that night, told my mom, they said I can't come back tomorrow unless I have pads.
Right.
So fortunately, my mom called her boss, who kind of knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So that next day, I go out the field. I got my own pads, and the coach looks like
He wasn't ready for that.
He wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
And so each day there was another. Next day you got to have your own shoes. You got to have your own pants.
Yeah.
But by Friday, I had all of the equipment. And so what they did, they had the commissioner of the elementary football league come out to the practice field and to say, we changed the rules on eligibility. Is that we're going to let you go back. You can still be a student here at Williams Heights, but we're going to let you play for your black elementary school. So in other words, they didn't let me play for Williams Heights, but they did let me play for my previous school. Long story short, by 7th grade, that's when integration hit, and all of us now were playing. And a lot of those guys apologized for that. And so the SEC at the time and the ACC were doing the exact same things. So as I went through my trip at Georgia, I had decided to go to Georgia.
Yeah.
And the second part of that story is that on my official visit after the game, of which Georgia won, so I was ready to sign, they set me up with Georgia's 2 best black players. And I won't call their names because they were pretty famous guys. But anyway, they took me out, and then we went to a party. After the party, they took me back to the dorm. And when I went back to the dorm, I saw segregation like I couldn't believe. All of the black players, which they had about 10 out of like 100,
Wow.
they were all segregated in a group together. And what they did, they set me down and they said, one of the things we want you to know is that, the bus ride, the game, we're all one. But this is the way it is after the game.
Wow.
We're relegated to just the 10 black guys. And if we were you, we wouldn't come to Georgia.
Wow.
And it stunned me that their 2 best players, who are all SEC and all Americans, told me as a black man they would recommend I find another school because they felt so isolated when the game was over.
Wow.
And that Vince, I won't call it that, all of those things I saw are just fluff, but this is the reality. So it shook me so hard because I really wanted to go, and
Yeah.
I was feeling it. My high school coach,
Wow.
my
A lot
mom,
of
you know,
pressure.
everybody in my
A
town.
lot of pressure.
And so I get a call from Clemson. I had never heard of Clemson, didn't know where Clemson was.
Yeah.
They invited me. They said, we're going to fly you up to, you know, for a game.
Okay.
And I go, this is the next week. And guess who they're playing? Georgia.
Of course.
And I can't believe
Yeah.
the story. And they upset Georgia
Wow.
at Clemson.
Wow.
And I go into the Clemson locker room, and it's just so different.
Wow.
The black players, and they didn't have but about 12. And the white players, they were
We're all together.
and all together. After the game, they were eating together. The party they went to, they were at the party together. And I didn't see the same thing I saw at Georgia. And the black players said, man, you got to come here.
Wow.
You know, Clemson is different, you know, and I told them about my experience. They said, you're not going to have that here. And so that led into me,
Wow.
surprisingly, and getting a lot of hate
Yeah. I'm sure
on
you did.
signing day, signing with Clemson and not Georgia. And it was bad because my mom was a nurse there.
Yeah.
And most of the doctors and nurses went to Georgia. And so she got
She got
kind
some
of
heat.
a bad deal, you know, from that. But
Wow.
anyway,
Some crazy stories, Randy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, just the thought that, you know, for me, and we'll speak this more later, but a lot of this stuff I'm so disconnected from, you know, it's things I think about Remember the Titans, you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
the classic movie that we see where you see that, and
Yeah.
for you to have lived that,
yeah.
you know, gives you just a whole different perspective. I do want to ask, as you reflected on your years, I know we had kind of talked through these questions before, so you can be ready for them, but are there any other stories of racism that really come to mind, whether as when you were a kid and you told some right there, but or as you grew up and got older, that you wanted to share?
Yeah.
I know that untold stories are agonizing, you know, and I imagine you've told most of these, but it's important for those in my position that don't know
Yeah.
to hear them. And so I just want to give you the chance to just share a little bit. What comes to mind?
Yeah.
Those other stories.
Two of the stories that come to mind are, they sound crazy now, but it was such a bad time. I think about them. My junior and senior year, I was inducted into the National Honor Society. Me and one other black guy, and one black girl. Of the junior and senior classes, 3 blacks were in the National Honor Society, which was awesome.
Amazing.
Amazing to get that honor, and so what was the practice is that the awards banquet was held at what was called the Elks Lodge, which was this really nice,
Yeah. Sounds nice. The
nice
Elks
place
Lodge.
where you would go.
Right.
But at the time, which was 1974, 75, blacks were not allowed in the Elks Lodge unless they were servants or they were serving crew. And so here's a dilemma with the school and trying to not say we couldn't attend, and would you attend? And it was almost like no one would speak. No one would say, you can come, you can't come. It was almost like growing up, and I've shared this with you before, there were colored facilities and there were white facilities. And we were just trained to use the colored facility. And so this was almost the same thing happening with that decision. And my mom was already getting the business because I was going to Clemson. And she worked at the hospital as a nurse, which was a great thing because she didn't become a nurse till later. She did domestic work until that. So now maybe a possibility of her losing her job. And so the other black guy was a friend of mine. He played in the band as well as the black girl. So we kind of, as families, got together, and they said we're going, and
Wow.
they said
Gutsy.
but it was just my mom was a single mom,
Right.
and I didn't want her to lose her job, and I said, so I told my mom. And I told her, I said, I could understand for your job security if you don't want to go. And I said, I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable, spot. So if you decide we don't want to go to this, let's not go.
Yeah.
She stood up and she said, we're going.
Wow.
She said, my job is not that important.
You can just leave right here.
Sorry
Our
about
friend
that.
Kendall.
She said, my job is important, but this cause and this situation is why we went to the elementary school
That's why we did it.
in the 4th grade. And she says, if I lose my job, I lose my job. And we went to that event, all 3 of us,
Wow.
and then all of our parents. And it was a good event, but you could see the shock of the white families as well. And I know this is unfortunate. The black serving staff
Wow.
was, I don't know if they were afraid or ashamed, but they felt the pain of us breaking that color barrier.
Yeah.
And so that event led to more places in our town that people were now able to go to. Give an example, the YMCA. Can you imagine having a YMCA
Right.
that didn't accept,
No.
you know,
I can't imagine
black
that.
people?
That's my whole world.
And so the next year, several black, people, forced it to where they were able
There you go.
to join the YMCA, which was next door to the Elks Lodge, and so
break through that
yeah,
barrier.
so I know that was a long story,
No,
but
it's
I
great.
had to share that.
No,
So
I appreciate
thank
it.
you,
Obviously, your mom.
thank you.
What an amazing woman.
Yeah,
For her to, and I presume she did not lose her job.
no, she did not lose her
Amen.
job.
Well, good. Glad for that. Any other stories that you wanted to share before we moved on here, or are those the ones that really stand out?
That's
for
the
you?
one that really stand out, and you can tell. I didn't know how
you
much
can't
it
tell.
stood out, but
I
it
make
did.
me emotional over here. Man, I just think about my childhood when I'm listening to you talk about your childhood, Randy. And, my schools were always integrated.
Yeah,
And it was normal. Now, as I'll share later, I think I was blind to a lot of the realities going on, insulated, maybe protected from
yeah,
what was happening underneath the surface. But in a lot of ways, you're one of the ones that got in there and broke those down, and I'm grateful for that. And any sports I played, sports was always sports and church were the places that I really made those connections, with people that weren't white in particular. Outside of that, even in my high school days, while our schools were integrated, our friend groups weren't as integrated. It was
yeah,
kind of white with white, and Hispanic with Hispanic, and Asian with Asian, and black with black. And I think for you, I'm just imagining, like Moses, you walking through this ocean of white people, and this teacher, courageously stepping out, and what your mom went through, and so much there that I'm not able to connect to, but I'm grateful for you sharing. And a question actually that your wife brought up, wanted to ask a little bit when I asked her, and my secret research was, how had racism changed from when you were a kid, in your elementary school, as the one black kid, to now that you have 15 grandkids? Like, what are you seeing that's different, and maybe what hasn't changed?
Well, a lot hasn't changed, unfortunately. We're still fighting the same fight. the good part of that is the resiliency of Black people not giving up, never giving up, never quitting, never stopping, never saying we're just going to settle for where we are. That is not our mantra, and that is not our position, and that's why I believe, what's happening now, we're opening another door that needed to be opened. So in terms of the difference, I don't think it's different. I think it's still there. I think the difference I see most is that it's taken a silent characteristic. In other words, early on, you almost knew who didn't like you, and who you had to stay clear of.
Right.
And they told you, I don't like you.
Right.
And so it was harder, but it was easier because you were not fooled by anything else. But now it's become more, it was overt, but now it's more covert. And you get into places where you're now trying to decide,
is my friend or not?
How is this guy really treating me? And it's amazing and terrible. Just even in today, when we go places as Blacks, or we got some guys now that are painting our house and doing our roof, and even trying to navigate, how are they, do they like me, or they're not speaking today because they may be racist. So the covertness has made it more difficult, and I think what is happening now is that people are asking white people to speak up and to stand up. If you like me, stand with me. If you don't like me, don't act like you like me, and then you go a different direction. So the openness, I think, was different. I think now trying to make those judgments, and it makes it difficult. And then sometimes what happens, you assume that they are a certain way because everyone's afraid, to say things. I'll give you an example, and probably I can ask you this question. It's when we went from the phrase Black to African American, to watch a lot of my white friends feel so uncomfortable. It's like, we have, whether to use the word African American,
not white,
and not know how to, and so can you relate?
I was going to share this later, but I have asked my friends several times, hey, I don't want to sound like an idiot, but what are you okay with me calling the color of your skin? Like, can I say Black? Should I say African American? Should I be like Nigerian? You know what I mean? Like from the Republic of the Congo? I'm not trying to make light of it. Or Jamaican, Dominican. And to be honest, people of color, I haven't really heard, I've heard that in movies, but I haven't heard that as an expression of our society until the last month. Now, maybe that's because I've been disconnected, which I'll speak to, but I would have always thought that was the most racist thing I could say. Because it brought up all the images in my mind of, like, for example, I just watched the movie Harriet. Which was, whoa, it was intense. But that was one of the words used, and so absolutely, like, I've been one of those people that I've been like, and I'm on stage sometimes doing it as a minister, and I'm kind of like, how do I don't want to offend anybody, like, I don't know what's offensive, I don't know what's not offensive, and so I've been there.
I think one of the breakthroughs for us as Black people, and I'm going to get it wrong, so if anybody's out there and you remember the date, let me know. I'm going to say 1967, I could be wrong. But James Brown came up with a song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And that became our theme song. And so when it got to the 2000s and when the word became African American, for me, I had to navigate that and be careful. And I think a lot of us do. But now I think because it's becoming more of a black and white issue, I hear the word Black more again. And so in that process, I know it's difficult to know how to navigate.
So, to all of our white listeners out there, is there anything that should be avoided in how we talk about it? Or
I think that would be based. Some people are offended if they're not called African American.
Okay.
But then there's some people who are not African American. They are Black, but they're Jamaican American, or they're They're from Haiti,
Right.
you know, American. So, you know, I'm okay either way, and a lot of people are okay either way. I think right now we're going to be okay either way, just as long as we can do this together.
Well, I think it's just
Yes.
a lot of grace on each other.
Yes.
So, okay, well said. Thank you.
Amen.
The last 3 to 4 weeks have been intense. I mean, as I've spoken to my black friends, many of them have said they're more tired than they've ever been.
Oh yeah.
Exhausted, fatigued, just because it's what's new to me is not new to any of them. They've been going through this their whole lives. You know, which you talked about the resilience and the energy that they have. I want to ask you personally, how has this all affected you? You know, from Ahmaud Arbery's death to obviously George Floyd, to as just symbolic of what's been happening for hundreds of years in our country. How have you dealt with it? How is it affecting you?
It's been very difficult to process, and I spoke to it on Sunday in my message about being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Whereas I did it the opposite way when this happened. The first time I watched the video, it was anger. Anger led to me saying things that probably would not have been beneficial. And it took me a while to get to the listening, because I was, and I still am, I'm at the beginning stage of this keeps happening. Here we are again. The only difference, I think, that these last 3 incidences have been so egregious that it's highlighted the egregious activities of the last, 400 years, where we've not taken the time to really look and see and go through everything that we've needed to go through. And so the last 3 weeks have been very difficult to process. And one of the things I hit on this morning in my quiet time, it says that if we don't process our pain, we will struggle to forgive. And it helped me because, like everyone that you've talked to, that's black, that's going through, each day's been different. There's not been a day where I've waken up and go,
This is normal.
this is over, I feel better.
Right.
It's been almost every day,
Roller coaster.
this is just terrible. It's and then what I've done, and I appreciate, is that I've talked to a lot of people and just listened to a lot of young people and their fears and their worry. Now talking with their children of talks I had to have with my children, who are now almost 40 years old. They're having with their 12-year-old 20 or 30 years later. And so it pains us to be here, and it actually scares our young people. One of the things that's happening at my school, I have kids that are 14, 15, 16, 17 that are so broken. They are afraid. I'm afraid for them, because if you get the wrong police officer that stops you, what do you say? How do you say it? How do they push your button? Do you take all of the, what they're going to give you? You just have to pray that whoever stops me is going to be, of a mindset of fairness. But now that so much is happening, you're realizing you're working on a 50-50 chance, and maybe even a 70-30. So that pain continues even today as we have this interview.
Now, you mentioned some of the fears that some of your students have. I wanted to ask you, look, I think it's one thing for a 15 or 16 or 17-year-old who's just kind of trying to figure life out to, be afraid. But for someone in your shoes, who's been around a while, and I want to ask you if you have fears, just as a black man living in America, and even in Gainesville. I think that, remember, you told me that one time, some fears you had, and I was really, whoa, I wouldn't have thought that someone, even part of the reason I read your resume was even to show, all that you've accomplished, all that you've done, all that you've helped the community, all that you've been for so many people, black, white, in every race. But for you to have those fears, could you speak to those a little bit?
it's amazing how it kind of comes and goes. But didn't realize this until the pandemic. Teresa and I started what we call porch time at 7 o'clock in the evenings after dinner. We'll go sit.
I called you during porch time.
You called me during porch time, and so we'll go sit on the porch at 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and we've met a lot of our neighbors, and I don't know if our neighbors realized we were, a mixed couple, and so I've sat there speaking to them, but thinking, what are they thinking? Are they looking at me and loving me, or they're happy to meet me, or they're disgusted with me? And so did they not speak because, etc. And so right before all this happened, there was a guy, and he was a white guy, and he had his hair shaved, and he looked kind of like a skinhead. And he walked down my street, right down the middle of the road, because there was not a lot of traffic, right, during the pandemic. And he stopped and he looked, but he didn't speak. And so we're kind of looking at each other, and he's looking away from me, but he never speaks. So I'm like, do I speak to this guy, or is he doing something? So he walks a little bit further down the street, and he gets on the phone. And I know this may be totally awkward, but here I am now. I'm 62 years old. I've lived in this house for 20 years. I don't know this guy. And there was a commotion that was happening in the downtown plaza. I live down that way. So he gets to the end of the street, and he just stops, and he's on the phone. And about 5 minutes later, another guy who looks like rides by on a motorcycle. And he stops at my corner, and he looks up on my porch. And then he takes off. So I'm sitting there going, this is about to get crazy. And then Teresa had already gone in the house, and I share that with her, and she said, well, maybe you were, and I was like, yeah, maybe. And so the next day, I see the same guy, but I don't see the motorcycle guy. And so I'm eyeing him, and then my thoughts, and then all of this stuff starts happening. And so you're talking about, are you still afraid? And then I was afraid, like, okay, maybe these guys are going to bust into my house. Do I need protection? Do I need to go and buy a weapon? And that's what a lot of folks do, is when those situations scare you, you head off to get protection. And that's how people get shot. But it's funny, as the week progressed, I would notice him, and after about 7 times, he came by and he turned and he said, "Hey, how you doing?"
Come on, man.
And I said, "Hey, how you doing, man?" And then he kept on going. And so he's been by a few times and he spoke to me. But you see how crazy those feelings are.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes we misjudge, but because of what I got is that to protect myself, I need to be very careful. So anyway, that's answered that a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, I am scared sometimes.
Golly, man. And this is not a unique experience in that it's not like you're the only black man that feels that way.
Yeah.
And my understanding from my friends who I've spoken to is that pretty much they all feel this way. And that doesn't mean they're faithless.
Right.
I think that they're all actually extremely faithful.
Mm-hmm.
It's more that these are real fears, and how could that not be in your heart, even if you don't act on them?
Yeah.
How could that not be there with what happened? Last question for you before we reverse this a little bit is, we're part of Campus View Church, and we do have a diverse congregation. It is more white though.
Yeah.
So this is how this is affecting us is really the question. It's why we're doing this, is to bring things to light and to help both sides of this. And so what do you think the next step is for us here at Campus View Church?
Yeah. I was actually talking this morning with Jared about the same question, and just been getting a lot of information from different people. Dan Ferguson sent me a great piece about during this time, really focusing on, how Jesus dealt with injustice. He sent me a lot of scriptures, about each time, and when you look at Jesus, his whole life was injustice. I mean, he never was really treated that great, even to the point of carrying our cross. And so he did a lesson for me, sent it to me last night. It was great, but the pain still remains, and the processing of that pain. And so when I think about us as a congregation, you're right. I mean, we're diverse, but we're predominantly white, but predominantly white leadership. And we need to have conversations about that. We need to convert more people of color as well. And so I think right now, and I do this in a sports analogy. It's like you have the hurdles in a race. You have the 110 hurdles, and then you have all the way around the track, which are the 400 hurdles. And so if I can use that analogy, I would say we're in the 400 hurdles, but we're just on the starting line. And in order to even get to the first hurdle, we have to listen, and we have to hear the stories. And that's why, things like this interview, things like we did a Zoom meeting with a bunch of diverse couples this past Sunday to see how people are feeling. I've called a few, other people. I think we got to listen to the stories. We got to hear each other. And I think we got to capture the moment, because for the first time we have more inclusion with not just black people being upset, but white people, brown people, Asian people. Look around the world. There's protests all over the world, and we have a moment in time that we can get some things done, and hopefully we'll capture that moment and do it together. So as a congregation, and I want everybody to, let's start talking to each other. Okay, now I'm not saying you're going to understand everybody, but we got to listen and we got to talk. We can't be judgmental. We can't get upset. It's not political. It is an issue of injustice of human beings, of mankind. And the Bible is explicit that we are to be treated the same. That has not been happening. So if we cloud out all the noise of, the politics of it and get to the core, are these events wrong? Yes, they are. And once we can do that, what are we going to do about it? We're going to join together, and that was the message, arm in arm, and we're going to do this together. So that's where I believe we are. We're not where we need to be. We've not dealt with things that we've probably needed to deal with in the past, and I'll take those hits on that. And I realize that, and we need to, see where we are, diagnose our condition, and now start to work on it. So I think that's where we are. We got a long ways to go.
Yeah, but it's a good starting point.
Yes, it is.
Further than we've ever been. So, something we're going to do here is for the last 15, 20 minutes or so, we're going to kind of flip it a little bit. I know you have some questions for me, and so I'd love to just kind of go for it. I'll answer the best I can. We've talked about some of these before, and I wrote some things down, but yeah, I know you have some questions.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to address and cover is the idea of, having a heart for our white brothers and sisters through this time, because, a lot of them, it's difficult for them as well. And I actually had a conversation with a white brother, and his heart was very heavy about the situation, and he wanted to talk with me, and we had a great talk. And then he called me the next day, and we had another great talk. And so what I want to be able to do is not only hear the black voices, but also hear the white voices. Because the lesson that we did on Sunday was the Jews and the Gentiles getting together, having conversations, realizing we're building a new church that is not common, in this region. How are we going to do that on one accord? And so there's going to be issues. There were issues that came up in that church. I'm preaching Sunday on Acts 16, and there's another issue. That same issue is coming up again. So we have to be willing to talk about the issues. And that's where we fail. We've not talked about a lot of issues, and I think now that dialogue. So my first question to you, as a white man, and as a young man, and as one who has not had to live through it, and you have a lot of friends and relationships of people of color, how have the last 3 weeks affected you personally?
I thought a lot about how I want to answer these questions. The last 3 weeks have been like all over the place for me, even the last week. Some of this is I'm just ashamed to share, but I will. In the first week after Ahmaud Arbery's death, and honestly even after George Floyd's death, I wasn't very affected at all. I was going through some other deep personal spiritual reflections about my life and my ministry life and how I think and act, and a lot of personal things that are kind of on the side. And I feel like everything else was kind of on the back burner, including this. And then the world started shouting at me, like, hey, like, what about all this stuff? And it's almost like when you're really deeply asleep and you're waking up real slow, and then something screams at you and you're like, whoa, and that's how I feel like it's been. And I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I wish I could say that the moment this happened, I was out there protesting, peacefully, but I wasn't. I was asleep. How has it affected me now?
Yeah.
Really deeply. It almost feels like a second conversion for me. I feel like I have so many thoughts and feelings. I'll just share a couple, because I know we have some other, with your other questions I'll share more. But just so everybody knows, like, I'm reading these notes because it's the only way I could compute. Like, sometimes when I have a lot in my head, I feel like my thoughts are like a big rubber band ball.
Yeah. And
the only way to string them out is to talk about it and to write them down. So this is heartfelt. I'm just reading my notes for that reason. I feel guilt. I feel guilt that I've benefited from a system that's designed to keep white people on top and everybody below. And that since the very beginning of our nation, no matter what the Declaration of Independence says, which I've read since all this, by the way, that this has been the case. I feel disoriented.
Yeah.
Like my neat little world has been flipped upside down, The movie Matrix is a good analogy, I feel like Neo felt when Morpheus was like told him the truth about the world. He was like, wait, I've been living in this, but I didn't know. And that's how I feel a little bit.
Yeah.
And ashamed of that. I feel shame. And I have to be careful with shame because shame often leads to self-pity, which is a dangerous feeling. Guilt is healthy in healthy doses, and I do feel that. And I feel like, and your other questions I think will pull this out, but I just feel terrible that my eyes been so closed. Like I feel like how have I'm 32, so I'm still young, but I'm a 32-year-old who has a lot of really close friends that are black.
Yes.
And so when all this happened and I called all of them, I just feel like my eyes were just kept opening, and I was like, how did I not experience, as a leader in the church now, I've been on staff here for 12 years, and I've had people specifically talk to me. I've had moments I know could have been my breaking point in a good way, but for it to take people dying, more people dying, and then people shouting to me about them dying, I think that's what I'm battling right now, and I think that's healthy. Like I think that's normal. And that's not a pity plea. That's just genuinely where I'm at. So how's it affected me? Like, it's been uniquely difficult. But at the same time, I don't want to talk about how hard it is because my black brothers and sisters have been feeling this their whole life, And so there have been times I've been like, oh man, I'm tired. And then I realize I'm tired. Like, I better man up, tough up a little bit, or woman up, because women are probably tougher than that anyway. But I need to get strong here because this is new for me, which is why I can feel that fatigue, but it's not new for most people. So I think that would be my first thought.
Yeah. One of the things you said that, I grew up and a lot of my friends are black. And I think one of the things as black people that we don't like hearing is when we're trying to confront an issue like that. And I've had so many people say, hey, some of my best friends are black.
Right.
And because some of your best friends are black, it doesn't mean that you understand what they are feeling. And so sometimes that's kind of a qualifier to say, hey, I'm not, racist, or I'm not this.
And here's my proof.
But some, but that happens. Or in, and vice versa. Was some of my friends are white, but that doesn't mean that I'm totally open to them. And so, to my white brothers and sisters, be careful how you throw that out, because one of the things that happens, we can call white people our friends or black people our friends, but how much time do you actually spend with them outside of the workplace or outside of the church? The people that are my friends, I spend time with outside of the building, and so friendship is a lot deeper than we working together or even we worshiping together. So I think that'll be a good teaching point for all of us. As we continue through this, I think this is kind of a two-part, kind of the same question.
Yeah, it is.
But how does the conversation of race and racism and all what we're going through, right, how does it make you feel?
I spoke to this a little earlier. Uncomfortable until recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, when I say recent, I'm talking about like within the last week. Uncomfortable because I mentioned this earlier, so I won't speak out of more mouth, but I'm terrified to say something wrong. I don't know what lingo to use. I care about my friends. Like black, white doesn't matter, but I don't feel like I have to walk on eggshells around my white friends because I'm white. So I have that moral authority, but with my friends that are not white, I can feel jittery about it, which can affect our friendship. That's not true of all of my friends that are that way, but especially those I'm not as close to, which speaks to your point. And how does this conversation make me feel? Like, I've always known that there's more to it than I was allowing myself to see what was going on in the world. And I've always actually prided myself of having a lot of genuinely close friends that are people of color.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of friends that are not white, that are black. And I think that in my life I've just assumed that means that I wasn't racist, and I have a story that I think of now is my best friend really married a black woman. And I remember the first couple months of his marriage, he got married a couple years before, and they'd been married about 10 years. I remember he said, "Kyle, I'm learning so much about my racist tendencies." In my mind, I was like, how could you married a black woman? Like, isn't that the definition of someone that's not racist? And I never pursued that. And now I look back, and if I could go back to my 22-year-old self 10 years ago, I would tell him, Kyle, you need to pursue that. Like, you need to listen to your friend because you will save people around you so much grief.
Yeah.
And I didn't. Hindsight's 20/20, of course, but I think that I've prided myself on. There's no way I'm racist. Now I realize that the word racism is a scary word, and white people don't like to talk about that word.
Right.
I'm listening to stuff that's been telling me that there's research to indicate that white people don't like the term racism, and I'll speak to why it's true for me. But the discomfort I feel with this conversation is that due to my unwillingness to allow myself to admit some pretty brutal truths about our country and even myself, it's easier just to be in denial about it. And to not talk about it, to not accept it, because I have no ground to stand on. I feel like as a white man with what's happened in our country, and I think as a leader in the church, I've oversimplified the issue for my whole life. That when you start to use the R word, racism, I think I immediately feel like, well, that's political, and we stay away from that. And I think that we're all seeing now, like, that's not the case at all. Like, racism was a very real problem that Jesus dealt with and broke boundaries on regularly, and I just feel like I'm waking up late. I'm late to the party. I know that it's like I'm the first white man to ever realize that. And I'm grateful that I'm realizing when I am. It could have easily been in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, and God will have used that too. But I think that as of today, I welcome the conversation. I want the dialogue. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear not just your story, but everybody's stories. And I have been. I've contacted and asked very specifically a lot of people, of my friends within the church, and I'll tell you what, it's been tough, to really try to walk in someone's shoes that's been through so much injustice, and it has worn me down, but that's okay. Like, it's okay to be worn down, for a good cause. And I know that my lateness to wake up and be a part of this movement, in a sense, for genuine equality and genuine justice, it's not like I'm the only white person in our church to wake up to that. There have been, I've spoken to a number of them that have felt this way for 50 years.
Yeah.
It's just, this is when I'm seeing it, and I wish to God it were earlier, you know. But, you know, I can't go back, so I can only go forward. So I think that mostly answers the question.
Yeah, it did.
So.
It did. And continuing on that same feed, as you have had all of these reflections and all these feedback from different people, again, that's where we are. I think that's going to continue to happen, and we welcome that. And so as you've been getting all of this information and these conversations, what are you learning through this process?
A lot. And my guess is that in a year, I will answer this question differently.
Yeah.
But I'm not me, Kyle, in a year. I'm me, Kyle, now.
Right.
And so I'll do my best. And I'm reading this book that's been sitting on this shelf for over a year that I have not read. Recommended to me by a friend. It's called White Awake. And it's all about what it means to be white in America and waking up to the realities. And the author has really helped me identify why I feel so disoriented and confused and guilty and heavy. And there are stages of white people waking up, according to the author, right? Which has been true of me. Doesn't mean it's true of everybody, but one of the stages is denial, and I feel like I've been in that for a long time. Like, I think I've been in denial about the truth about what so many people are experiencing. But Pat, one of the reasons I was in denial, I realized, and I can put a word on it, that I have what the author calls white trauma. And what this is what white people have been responsible for. Not all white people, but white people have been responsible for in the world, but in our country, is so horrifying that it's traumatizing. And that the only way to deal with it is to ignore it or face it head on. And if you don't have the courage to face it head on, or the friends to help you do it, you're going to remain in denial. And I think about the movies I've watched that could have clicked this for me, but I remember recently we watched Harriet, and the way that slaves were treated because of where I'm at. I mean, I literally walked outside and I cried. Like, I was with my family, and I just felt so ashamed. Like, that's my legacy. I'm just, and again, I want to be careful here. Like, understand everyone. I'm speaking just from emotion in my heart. But there have been times I felt ashamed to be white, because of what my race. Not that as a Christian I really think about things as much in terms of race, so much as the kingdom of God, but I do have a race. And just the fact that racism is institutionalized and it's just part of our system that has benefited me. I have white trauma. That's how I would explain it. And I'll tell you some of the facts that have really hit me, that I've had working through right now. That I do feel genuinely traumatized. And I felt that for a long time, but I've never voiced it like that. And so when you don't say something out loud and talk about it, you can bury it. And I think I've buried it. And, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1865. After these, literally, it took a civil war. It took us killing each other to get past slavery in the way that you think of slavery in the past. Because slavery in some ways didn't end, right? But from 1877 to 1950, there were around 4,000 documented black men and women that were lynched in America. And for those who don't know, lynching is when a mob kills someone without trial. And I know for a fact that many of those black men and women that were killed, particularly black men, were killed simply just for talking to a white woman. And, you know, I've never heard that. I hear about terrorism, and we and rightfully so, we have a whole day dedicated to 9/11. I mean, when you think about 9/11, around 3,000 Americans died to terror. And we should celebrate that. But I didn't even know this fact. That after slavery was done. And like that, like, how could we not talk about that? White trauma. Like, unless you face it, you can't get around how horrible it is. Or I think about when we still celebrate Columbus Day. You know, the day Columbus, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And we say he discovered America. But there were people here for millions of years. I don't know how, hundreds of thousands of years. And in a lot of ways, white people are responsible for the, maybe genocide is too strong a word, maybe it's not, of taking. It's almost like if I lost my iPhone and someone found it and they said, "Look what I discovered, it's mine now." You know, like that was how the author described it, and that's traumatizing to me. That, like, I don't look back with pride on that. I look back and I'm like, this is horrible. Like I'm grateful for what I have, and God can use anything. But, and again, I don't know how me saying these things will affect listeners, but I'm just trying to be honest at the risk of that. And the last thing is, after Pearl Harbor, when America was pulled into World War II, we basically told our Asian Americans that they had to move away from the West Coast. I'm generalizing. I didn't know any of this until recently. And my understanding is that over 100,000 Asian Americans were incarcerated without, just because of our fear. And that's because, in a lot of ways, we have dehumanized other races. It's the only way to do the things that we've done. And I say we, of course, I'm not back then doing these things, but I think that because I've been so blind, in that sense, my silence has fed that system. And, I feel like in that way, my gospel's even been incomplete that I preached. Like, and so what am I learning? Like, I mean, I guess that's where I started. Like, it's been so challenging to see, and as I've called, I didn't count, but I've called and emailed at least 20 to 30 of my friends and people in the church to ask them how they're feeling, and that's just wow. Like, they all are saying the same things that you're saying. They're exhausted. They're ready for their white friends to start talking about it because they've been talking about it for so long. It's in a sense, it's almost like it's our turn. And so I feel excited about that next part of the journey, but I feel really sobered by it. I haven't even finished the book yet, so I read about 100 pages in 3 days, and I had to stop for a little bit. I'll pick it up this week and finish. I'm sure that my language will be different when I'm done, but that's what I'm learning.
One of the things that we don't want white people, especially our white brothers and sisters, to feel that we want the weight of slavery and lynching on their backs. The white brother I was talking to, he says, black people act like I'm the one that did all these things. And that's not what we're asking for. You can't go back and undo 400 years. And that's why I say, as a church, I think we're on that 400-meter hurdle. We're at the starting line, ready to go. So we don't want love and understanding out of a guilt feeling of, hey, I did that. But I think we start at that starting line together. What we're seeing in the news of arm in arm saying enough is enough. And in that conversation, enough is enough. So what we don't want, and what I don't want, is the white people to feel pressured that, they gotta, do X, Y, Z. And it kind of leads into my next question. And I don't know if, how kind of to ask it, but do you feel that a lot of people, white people specifically, feel pressured in order to act a certain way, to do certain things, or to say certain things? Do you feel there's a lot of pressure coming, and how do you respond to that from black people?
Yes, but pressure's not bad. I mean, definitely. Like, what opened my eyes to this is people screaming on social media. I personally often choose to be silent on social media for various reasons. I think sometimes it can hurt my local gospel and the way I interact with people. But I have. I remember a text that really got me thinking was a white friend of mine posted on a big group me I'm on with a bunch of ministers, basically that silence is the same thing as participating in these things. And one of the words used was also complicit. Which has been a big thing, like silence equals complicity. And I struggled with that. I'm like, hey, is that true? Like, and so that's why that's when I started calling my friends and stuff, and I got a wide range of feelings about it. Some people felt very strongly yes, some people felt like it's not the same thing, but it's something. Like,
Yes.
silence is a form of injustice, but it's not the same as I have black slaves,
Yeah.
or I am oppressing people directly.
Mhm.
And so I think that my attitude has changed in the last week about this, whereas I think it's wrong if we're screaming at white people to speak and expecting that to be the reason we speak, because we all have very different feelings about social media anyway.
Mhm.
And just like I can be pessimistic and I can be skeptical, and so even when I see white people posting these long posts about to all my black friends and things, I can be skeptical because that to me seems like posturing. I'm not saying it is.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, a lot of the people that have done that, I know their heart. I think
Yeah.
what I hope is happening is that that's not all we're doing.
Exactly.
Is that
exactly.
the only thing we're doing is that's so easy.
Posting,
Like
yeah.
post a little thing
Yeah.
that takes for a lot of people almost no courage. In fact, it almost builds your resume. What I want to know is, and I'm again,
Yeah.
just to be clear, I think that for a lot of reasons that can be a good thing. But what I want to know is what else is happening that you're doing? Like, what other conversations are you having on a personal level? And I think that's what from all this, I don't know if I agree that silence on social media is complicity,
Right.
but I think silence is a form of injustice, and that I have to find a way to voice. And I asked my friends, what would you expect of me as
Yeah.
a leader in the church? And
Yeah.
they said you have to say something. Like, you pray, you talk about it, you preach about it, you do an interview.
Yeah.
And the thing that a regret I will have is that I personally was so slow to respond to these things. And I know that we've already said as a church we were, and because I wasn't prepared. I
Right.
wasn't prepared. And people have told me, it seems, some of the black people in the church that I've talked to, my brothers and sisters, have said it seems like when you guys did the same thing for 3 weeks that you weren't prepared. And I was like, you're right, I wasn't. And that's to my shame. But it'll never happen again. Or I never want it to happen again, where something like this happens and I'm silent and my brothers and sisters are left wondering. And if it weren't for people talking to me,
Yeah.
even though I think some of it was done poorly,
Yeah.
I find grace affects me more than anything, but there needs to be brutal honesty too. And
Yeah.
there's a mix there that needs to happen. And so I think that the people who are brutally honest about what they feel, but are also gracious because they know that hopefully they can see my heart.
Yeah.
Some blindness is not willful.
Right.
Some is unwillful, no matter how horrible it is. And I feel that way personally. My blindness has not been willful. Although there have been times I think I've chosen to not see.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to say all of my,
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I understand the rage.
Yeah.
And really, I should forgive it, even if it's ungodly at times.
Yeah.
Even if it moves into an ungodly place, because it's would I be any different? Almost
Yeah.
certainly not. And the truth is, the huge majority of my brothers and sisters have been unbelievably forgiving
Yes,
and gracious. And
Yeah.
I've never had to forgive someone like that probably. And so I've just really appreciated
Amen.
the way that people respond to me in that way. So yeah,
Amen.
there you go. So
Well, you're talking about being uncomfortable, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I'm going to be preaching Sunday, or maybe just teaching or talking on Acts 16. And there's 3 or 4 great examples in there, again, in the church where you have Jews and Gentiles having to deal with some uncomfortable conversations. And so as we wrap up this interview, actually I'm still feeling pain. I'm still feeling pressure. I'm not in a great place because I'm uncomfortable. And I know you're uncomfortable. I think we are uncomfortable as a nation. And I think the only way we're going to get there together is together. Being able to have these conversations, being able to have these interviews. So I appreciate your heart. I've always admired you, even from a young college kid to now. I think you get it. I hope that more of our white and black brothers and sisters will get it, but that we'll also put on the full armor of God. In other words, to understand that we can't let this split us up. We're at a moment where we can get some reforms, some things change, but it will only come if we do it together.
Yeah.
White, black, Hispanic, Asian, and that's what's happening. And I pray to God that we capture this moment and really allow us to do this together. So I appreciate you in this time.
Amen.
And thank you for including me.
Yeah, well, and just to close this thing out, I know I speak on behalf of the leadership, when I say that I'm grateful for those of you who have waited patiently for us to have this dialogue, and ask for continued grace as we navigate the road ahead. I think this could be a really great time in our history.
I think so too.
Like something that you said, Randy, you said before, is in the past it's been like 90% people of color protesting, and now it's not that way anymore.
Yeah.
And I hope to be a part of that positive change, And I was, just to end with the story here, the other day I was emotional about it, and I'm being honest. I'm not just saying that to sound good. Like I was really emotional about it, and my son was sleeping. He was napping, and I was with him. And those are always special moments.
Yeah.
I know they're not gonna last forever. And I was looking at him, and this blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. I'm like, okay, what's your experience gonna be like? And I realized that I told him. He was sleeping. He will never know this, but I told him I'm going to really try to make like a better world for you.
Amen.
Because I don't want your friends that aren't white to feel like my friends that aren't white have felt as I've grown up.
Amen.
So that's what we'll do together. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for listening, guys. We love you, and more to come.
Thank you, guys.
Can we pray together?
Yeah.
Father God, we love you, and we know that you have seen all this coming for a long time, and we want to make the world better. We want to make your world better. We want to reconcile the world, not just to you, but to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that racism is, in some ways, really just the height of human stupidity, and we are dehumanizing people in a way that you never intended. We are your image, and I pray for those of us that have been dehumanized, Father, to have the strength and the resilience to stand up under it, and the grace to forgive when seems, I can't even imagine. You can only look to Jesus as he forgave the people that were literally killing him. I pray that you give them the strength. And for those of us that are in a position where you have not been dehumanized, we have benefited from the system, I pray that we would find our voice, and I pray that you'd help us to cry as loudly or even more loudly than our brothers and sisters who've been doing it for hundreds of years. God, we love you. We know only you can bring reconciliation. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.